than planned, just because it took people slightly longer to get back from the breakout room. So thank you for navigating the winding staircases and corridors of the Peace Hall, and fantastic to see all of you here for this penultimate session of the day on sustainable places, going green from the bottom up. So getting really into the issue of net zero and levelling up that we talked about in the session with Andy Haldane and Helen Thompson earlier, but perhaps on a slightly more practical level. I'm delighted to be chairing this session because it's certainly been true over the last few years that the environmental debate has happened quite a lot at the level of Whitehall, but perhaps not enough at the level of communities. In people's homes, in people's driveways, in their neighbourhoods, in their workplaces, in their local transport systems. These are the places where net zero has actually got to happen. We know from past mistakes that top-down policies don't always lead to the types of behavioural change or indeed the democratic consent that this process demands. I think of focus groups that we have done where we've heard voters bitterly talk about politicians telling them to buy a diesel car, for example, or buy a combi boiler, or indeed get a smart meter, only for politicians to perhaps change their minds, or the promises of those technologies not necessarily to be fulfilled a couple of years later. So the kind of central, kind of national approach to going green hasn't always worked. And I think there is an opportunity, in line with the conversation of this conference, to think about net zero from the other end of the telescope, from the bottom up. How do we encourage places and people to switch to greener behaviours themselves? How do we ensure and navigate that role between government on the one hand, with incentives and institutions, but businesses, households, neighbourhoods, local groups? How do we link those different actors together such that they're working in the same direction and delivering real change? What do we need to do to create places that are genuinely sustainable to live in, without exacerbating social division or indeed creating new ones? And I think of some of the local conversations I've had about low traffic neighbourhoods in particular when I think about that question. How can net zero help us to level up, as Andy Haldane and Helen Thompson spoke about? How can we use net zero to bring investment, jobs, but also pride, also belonging back to places where those things have been lost in recent decades? And I am delighted to have with me on stage a completely fantastic panel to talk about some of those issues. And I'm very grateful to Lloyds Banking Group in particular for supporting this session of the day. Our first speaker, I'm going to introduce all of our speakers and then invite our first speaker up to the lectern to say a few words. Our first speaker is Tracy Brabin. She is the Mayor of West Yorkshire, and the only female mayor, which she's very proud of. We spoke about on a panel a few weeks ago. Tracy will be known to many of you as the former Member of Parliament for Batley and Spen, taking over from Joe Cox in that constituency, obviously now held by Joe's sister Kim. She's also a former shadow minister in a number of different roles, and she may be even better known to many of you from your screens as a former actress on EastEnders, Emmerdale and Coronation Street.
Queen of the soaps.
Yeah, indeed.
Everybody's got to live, haven't they?
Our second speaker is Shanika Amarasekara, who's Chief Impact Officer at the British Business Bank, where she sits on the Executive Committee and is also responsible for ESG, economics, policy and strategy. So has a brief that is incredibly germane to this subject and obviously sits on top of a whole amount of investment through the BBB into some of these issues. We will then hear from Tom Lacane, who's Special Advisor for Responsible Business at Lloyds Banking Group. Tom was formerly head of the Inclusive Economy Unit in government, so has experience of both sides of the fence, both private and public sector in this regard, and has formerly worked for both the Cabinet Office in government and outside government for the WWF as well. Fourth, we're going to hear from Jason McCartney MP. Jason is the Member of Parliament for Colne Valley, which he has held since 2010, apart from a brief and thoroughly undeserved hiatus between 2017 and 2019. Jason's a proud Yorkshireman. He's local to here, previously been in the RAF. He's worked in journalism. He's also been a university lecturer in journalism before entering Parliament. And our final speaker, who is behind me on the big screen, is Dr. David Halpern, who is Chief Executive of the Behavioural Insights team, the founder of the Behavioural Insights team, and one of the world's leading experts on what is known as nudge theory, how we can, through behavioural insights research and messaging and intervention, change people's behaviour in a positive way. He was fundamental to the government's efforts around coronavirus, getting us to abide by the rules and ensure that that our behaviours did not inadvertently increase the spread of the pandemic. It's perhaps a bit of a shame that his nudges weren't aimed inside Downing Street rather than out of it. So that is our panel. And I'm really looking forward to the discussion. This will work much like other sessions. We will have 5-10 minutes from each of our panelists, and then we will have some time for Q&A both on the floor, on the stage and from the floor. But without further ado, can I now introduce our first speaker, Tracy.
Great. Thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me here today and for coming out and not going shopping in the Peace Hall, because you could so easily be doing that instead. Such a lovely day. I'm really grateful to Onward for hosting part of Restitch here in West Yorkshire. And by the looks of the programme, you've already had some great sessions and some obviously brilliant ideas being shared. Isn't it great to be here at the Square Chapel and the Peace Hall, and the only remaining Georgian cloth hall in the world, but built before the Industrial Revolution, and it's seen a lot down the years, and the £19 million worth of renovation completed only a couple of years ago is truly superb. But the renovation required bold thinking, ambition, vision, and a commitment to delivering for the community. And because this isn't ours, is it? We are only custodians, keeping it in good health for the next generation. And it's something that you could say about what's needed if we are to tackle the climate emergency. And I'm proud, in 2019, we were one of the first combined authorities to declare a climate emergency, alongside 5 of our local authorities. And we set out a bold ambition to be the region with net zero carbon emissions by 2038, with significant progress by 2030. And when I was elected just over a year ago, I made tackling the climate emergency one of my promises to the people of West Yorkshire, working in lockstep, of course, with Bradford, Leeds, Calderdale, Kirklees, and my good friends and colleagues here in Calderdale. Calderdale knows only too well the damaging effects climate change can have. Flooding events thought of as once in a generation are happening every 2 to 3 years. Not far from here in Hebden Bridge, people have begun to fear heavy rain, knowing that, again, they could have their business ruined or their home completely destroyed. Every time it happened, the community pulled together, helping each other, supporting friends and neighbours, and nominating flood wardens to help when the worst happened. But they shouldn't have to just put up with it. As a community, they made the case that this couldn't and shouldn't happen again. And thanks to the investment in new flood defences, the Council, the Combined Authority and the Environment Agency have been able to make Hebden Bridge and its near neighbours, Mytholmroyd and Todmorden, safe once again. But defences downstream aren't the only way flooding is being prevented. Initiatives further upstream are helping solve the problem too. Community organisations like Slow the Flow are installing natural flood management systems, which help to slow how quickly water gets into rivers and streams, delivered primarily by an army of volunteers, local people committed to building a better, stronger, safer community. And it's that sort of partnerships we want to see. But of course, we can't just rely on local goodwill and energy. And if we absolutely have to escalate at scale, in the 2020s, we have to get a move on and hit our climate targets. So I'm proud that we opened the UK's first ever fully solar-powered park and ride facility in Leeds, in Sturton. Served by a fleet of zero-emissions buses, we have the highest number of electric vehicle charging points outside of London, and we're launching the Net Zero Regional Accelerator with a budget of £20 million to attract investment in sustainable emission-lowering projects, and we're investing £40 million to deliver our West Yorkshire Climate and Environment Plan. But this isn't just about delivering on my manifesto commitments, whether that's EV buses, retrofitting homes, or green jobs and skills. It's much larger than me, and it's much larger than you. It's about the future of our planet. We must act now. We cannot afford to wait. Last year, when I went to COP26, I spoke with other mayors and leaders from across the world about how climate change was affecting our community and what we were doing in response. And it was clear we've got to accept cities and industrialization is a large part of the problem. But also we must know that with the right leadership, cities can be part of the solution. As the mayor of Los Angeles said, mayors are the tugboats that turn the tankers of national government around to tackle the biggest challenge facing us. Because while this is a global crisis, the solutions are local. So it's no surprise then that the climate emergency is one of the things that the 10 metro mayors in England are collaborating on, sharing best practice, learning from each other. Whether that's Steve Rotherham in Liverpool City region, looking at how tidal energy could be used to provide power to his community, or Ben Haushen in the Tees Valley, where the production of green hydrogen is being developed, or Andy Street in the West Midlands, investing in establishing a gigafactory building capacity for increased battery power, or Andy Burnham delivering the UK's largest cycling and walking network, making journeys and communities greener, cleaner and safer. And I stand side by side with Sadiq Khan, chair of C40, on his push to tackle and gain further powers to tackle the climate emergency at a regional level. Because mayors across England are leading the way, and we're so ready to do much more. We know our people, and we know what's possible. And we know our solutions must also be just and fair. Levelling up and tackling the climate emergency are two sides of the same coin. And it can't be right that the most disadvantaged are the most affected by the impact of climate change. Today, the poorest households are experiencing the worst impacts of energy price rises. The Joseph Rowntree Foundation's analysis has shown single adult households on low incomes are spending a shocking 54% of that income on energy bills, up 21% since 2019-20. Now, it's welcome, and we all saw it yesterday, to see the Chancellor intervening. But the devil, of course, is always in the detail as we get nearer the autumn and further potential rises. But the climate emergency isn't only about mitigating its impact. It's about developing the ideas, the skills, the workforce to identify answers to the questions facing us all. And that's why we must ensure people are equipped to excel at the jobs of the future. In West Yorkshire, we're working with employers, our schools, universities, colleges, to make sure people have the right skills to grow our economy in a sustainable and inclusive way. Skills that will help us keep our homes efficient, warm, dry. And we're already investing in retrofit programs that will help those most in need. Working with social housing providers to insulate thousands of rented homes, ensuring new affordable homes are built to high energy efficiency standards. When 1 in 20 deaths in West Yorkshire are associated with poor air quality, and the old, the young and the vulnerable are left with preventable breathing conditions, we must also clean the air we breathe by getting rid of old, dirty, polluting buses. So I'm pleased we have successfully bid for £24 million of government funding to bring over 100 zero-emission buses into our region. It's good, but it's not enough. Every bus, truck and car needs to be zero emissions. More people need to walk and cycle. We also need people to ditch the car and hop on the bus, which is why I was determined through the enhanced partnership to slash the cost of bus fares while reconnecting communities left adrift by bus company cuts. And in September, you'll see the cost of a single ticket capped at £2, any operator, any distance, and the M card, which is the most sophisticated Oyster card version outside of London, will be slashed from £5.50 to £4.50 to try and encourage those on the tightest budgets to use the bus. But we can't do this alone. We need businesses to work with us. So we're helping them lower their carbon footprint, providing hundreds of SMEs with grants, helping them reduce waste, water and energy consumption. And this work on the ground, working with businesses, local authorities and partners, is absolutely vital and urgent. And the key to that is delivering sustainable, inclusive and transformational investment now. So when I think about how West Yorkshire is going to look in 2050, in 23 years' time, I see a region of opportunity, cleaner, greener and more inclusive, innovative, collaborative, successful, up there with some of the best places in the world to live. A region where the right decisions were made here today in the 2020s. But none of that will be possible unless we bring communities with us, demonstrating that tackling the climate emergency isn't something vague for others to solve. It's about today, about making changes now. If people can see cheaper energy, more manageable bills, a better quality of family life, where children aren't huddled around the kitchen table to do their homework because it's the only warm room in the house, then we have a chance to go further and faster and have more buy-in from the public. And that's why I and other mayors are laser-like focused on this agenda. We want to support and empower communities to make changes for themselves, for their children, and of course their children's children. It's the future we all want. It's the future we all need. And now must be the time to act. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much, Tracy. There was a huge amount in there, but there were two things which I took away very, very quickly. Firstly, the real-world impact of climate change now on places like this area, Halpern Bridge, as you say, but more broadly, and the impact of flooding in Calderdale, I know, has been devastating. But then also the strategic power of mayors to command some of this activity and to drive forward real change. So thank you for that, and I hope we can get into some of that in the ensuing discussion. Can I now come to Shanika, please? And feel free to sit rather than go from the lectern if you prefer.
Yep, sure, thank you. And thanks for having me, because for us as the British Business Bank, the two policy issues that we talked about on levelling up and transition to a net zero economy really sit at the heart of our mission. And just by way of background, the British Business Bank was set up in 2014 to help smaller businesses with access to finance and to make finance markets work better. But we've spent the last 2 years really focused on COVID response schemes and rolling out schemes at pace, like bounce back loans and future fund and schemes like that. And we reflected last year on what this means for us now, having done that and grown our balance sheet so significantly, and what the future looks like for us in the longer term. And we looked at our mission, and we've revisited our mission and included not just what we had as a regional inequalities and access to finance and trying to bridge that gap, but trying to do that while also supporting smaller businesses in their transition to net zero, because for us those two things go hand in hand. And if you don't do one without the other, you do create greater barriers and greater inequalities in the regions, and you don't really seize the opportunities that also exist in the local economy. So it'd be a shame to not do those things together. So seizing that new mission and thinking about, well, where do we start? Where are smaller businesses in their current journey of transitioning? We started off by doing a piece of research last year. It's on our website. It's called Smaller Businesses in the Transition to Net Zero, and we launched it just before COP26. And it's really interesting to know where the baseline is of smaller businesses in the UK on this journey of transitioning to net zero. And what it highlighted is that there is a huge amount of appetite and interest from smaller businesses to do this, but there are barriers, significant barriers in understanding. What does decarbonisation mean? What is net zero? Is there clear science and frameworks that businesses can easily embed? And that doesn't exist yet. But also another barrier is upfront costs and access to finance, and that inequality of access to finance across the regions came out in different regions having different types of barriers as well. So for us, that was a really useful baseline starting point. So two things that we took away from that research. Firstly, on the transition to net zero, smaller businesses make up half of all UK business emissions. So as a nation, we're not going to be able to transition to net zero without taking the smaller businesses with us. And smaller businesses are founded in local communities, local ecosystems, and their opportunities and the employment that they create and the growth that they create is linked so closely to the local economies that it's so important that you don't just do this as a national level. You do seize the opportunity of the local economies. So you can't transition to net zero without smaller businesses. Smaller businesses are the backbone of local economies, and you have to start from that starting point as you think about how you embed steps in place to support smaller businesses in transitioning. So for us, we also then thought about, as the British Business Bank and responsible for creating finance markets for smaller businesses, what are we going to do? And we have early stages, but last year in the comprehensive spending review, we were provided with more funding to work on our regional funds by the Chancellor. We already have a number of regional funds, the Northern Powerhouse Investment Fund, the Midlands Engine Investment Fund, and also one in Cornwall, Isles of Scilly. But what we've had funding for from last year's spending review is actually grow that to be regional funds across the UK, including devolved nations, and recognising that we have to embed sustainability and the transition to net zero into the strategy of those funds, working not centrally, but with people like Tracy in conversations we've been having about what do local communities need in terms of regional funding for smaller businesses to be able to embed the benefits and transition faster in the local economies. And it's really good to see that the local populations have a huge amount of ambition and a huge amount of really drive to be able to do something, and the information needs to be specific to the regions. It can't be just generic information, but the frameworks need to be created. So really pleased to be on this panel and hear what next steps. I think we're all on the early stages of this journey, but what do we need to do and what do we need to do quickly?
Shanika, thank you very much. I think that is the perfect segue from British Business Bank into other types of financing. And Tom, I'd love to hear a bit more about how Lloyds Banking Group thinks about this challenge, both in terms of your own business, but also working with others.
Yeah, thanks, Will. Good afternoon, everyone. And I think, as Lisa mentioned earlier, it's a particular pleasure for us to be in Halifax today. As I'm sure most of you will know, Halifax is part of Lloyds Banking Group, so we feel a particular affinity to this place and some of the origins of the group we are now in some of the communities here. So it's a particularly apposite place for us to be talking about this. And I think I would also say that the net zero transition and supporting regional development are two of the things that we care really deeply and passionately about as a group, and are really challenging ourselves now to think about how can we do more with partners to further both of those agendas. On the net zero transition, it's been really heartening to hear today so many people thinking about how that can play out at a local level. We agree. A lot of our focus in recent years has been maybe more at the national level. So, for example, we were one of the key financiers of the Dogger Bank wind farm last year, so we've been able to invest £1 billion into that as a major national infrastructure project, which we're very proud of. We've launched a green mortgage, which we're hoping will provide £10 billion worth of finance for more energy efficient homes. So those are some of the national priorities that we've been looking at, but we've been increasingly, like a lot of the commentators today, engaging with local partners, with regional governments, with Tom Reardon in Leeds and a lot of your colleagues around the country to understand, well, actually, how can we be much more supportive of these agendas at a local and a regional level? And I think, as we've heard from a few people today, we see that the net zero transition and the transition and the communities across the country is really intertwined and is a huge opportunity. And I'll give you 3 examples, which we keep on hearing from the conversations that we've had, and all of which have been touched on today. So the first is transforming the physical fabric of a lot of our communities, that we know that the poor state of the housing stock in this country, poor state in particular of the private rented housing stock, is a real challenge for lots of towns, lots of cities across the country. It leads to really poor social outcomes, it leads to really poor health outcomes, and of course it has real challenges in terms of climate emissions in the UK's housing stock. So we think there's a huge opportunity to think about the retrofit agenda, as it's called, as actually a huge opportunity for neighbourhood renewal, which has kind of multiple benefits in terms of community renewal. So we think that's one really exciting opportunity to link these two agendas. We've heard a lot today about buses. Absolutely core issue for a lot of communities, enabling connectivity, mobility. Again, we know one of the huge challenges in communities is around poor air quality. There's a huge opportunity to sort of address both of these issues together. how can we work out ways to more rapidly finance and deliver net zero buses, towns, cities across the country. Huge opportunity to move both of those at the same time. And then Shanika and I were talking just before now about perhaps even bigger opportunities around how can we use this to create the kinds of high quality skilled jobs that we all want to see all across cities, the towns of our regions. I don't think the single conversation I've been in this year in a northern or a Midland city, and we've been in a lot of them, where the future of that community hasn't been tied to generating really high quality skilled jobs, tied to the green revolution, building on the kind of industrial revolution and the innovation of these communities historically. So like everyone else, I think we see those as huge opportunities to use the net zero transition as a springboard for the communities across this country, all the way from renewing some of the left behind neighbourhoods in cities to creating high quality jobs. So a few thoughts on what might be done about that. As we heard this morning, I think it's a role to play, what we can play as private sector, a role to play for national government, and then roles to play for kind of local governments and combined authorities. For us as the private sector, we in Lloyds and increasingly with other corporate partners are rolling our sleeves up to try and work with partners in different cities, towns across the country to design solutions, financing packages that can accelerate delivery in those places. So that's where it's on us, is to roll our sleeves up, get involved, work out solutions that work. So we're starting on that. We're starting on that with quite a lot of humility, because we know other people have been thinking about this for many years, but we're here to roll our sleeves up and do what we can do to support that. There's a role for national government to support regional delivery. So we know that there remains a gap between what can be financed purely by the private sector and what can be generated in terms of returns. So we think there's a vital role for the national government to play in sort of filling in that gap. So we're delighted, for example, the UK Infrastructure Bank, who we work very closely with, have £4 billion of money to invest in regional infrastructure schemes. But the more that there can be that kind of unlocking capital from national government, the better. And we're also talking to our friends in national government about a few other changes they can make just to help incentivize that transition. So whether it's lowering stamp duty on high energy efficient properties to incentivize the kind of retrofit and renewal that we are interested in local areas, or whether it's schemes to take some of the risk away from the second-hand electric vehicle market, which will make that more accessible to a broader range of income groups, rather than something that is really only accessible to wealthier families. So those are some of the changes. And then local and regional governments, Tracy, as you know, partnering with you and your colleagues across the country to see what we can do to practically unlock some of these things. Shared knowledge, we're very interested in how we can do that. The more there are common models across the country, the more replicable ways of delivering retrofit or bus rollout, the easier it is for us to be able to support that and accelerate it at pace.
Tom, thank you very much. And fantastic to hear about the work that you're doing, and looking forward to getting into this. Please do give Tom a hand. Jason, can I now come to you, perhaps from a slightly different perspective? I'd be fascinating to think about how you approach this question. And also, I don't know if you were planning to talk about this, but obviously the Conservative government is the government that committed to net zero, placed net zero into legislation, but it's also, I see various of your colleagues also a bit nervous about net zero and some of the implications in some respects. So I'd be interested in some of your view of the politics of this as well, if that's all right.
Is there any time left for me?
There is.
Oh,
there
fantastic. My name's Jason McCartney. I'm Member of Parliament for Colne Valley in West Yorkshire. I cover the last bit of Yorkshire before we get to the Pennines and go over to the dark side of Lancashire. Look, I'm not a member of the government. I'm a backbench Conservative MP. I don't always agree with the government, but when I do disagree, I try and do it in a constructive way and try and persuade and cajole them to come round to my way of thinking. I am glad, Will, you didn't ask me to go to the lectern because I didn't get the memo about a welcoming speech. And I just wanted to talk about my perspective as a backbench Conservative MP. I am in a number of groups with other Conservative MPs. There are about 360 of us now, with a few by-elections in the offing. There's one big group, the Conservative Environmental Network, and I've just been in a previous panel with Katie from that network. And we come up with policy ideas, not just on net zero, but also on the environment. And we came up with a lot of ideas and amendments to improve the Environment Bill, which went through last year. I'm also in the Net Zero Delivery Group, which is chaired by Chris Skidmore, the former Universities Minister. Again, because if we work together as a like-minded group of backbench Conservative MPs, and there's 50 or 60 of us, when we ask to see the Prime Minister or the Chancellor Rishi, they don't want to not see us, and it means that we can work together as a group. I'm going to do something quite unusual as a politician and keep trying to answer this question. And the question is then, how do we encourage communities to help achieve net zero? And I'm going to try and keep that in my mind all the time. Politics, as Tracy knows, is very, very challenging. I go to a school every Friday morning, primary school, secondary school in my patch, and the questions I always get asked, always, are about the environment. Why do we still have plastic? Why do we still have diesel cars? Why are people still flying for meetings when they can do it on Zoom and Teams? They have the perfect vision of achieving net zero and improving our environment really, really quickly. But like me, Tracy has been an elected politician, and they realise the challenges and implications of suddenly stopping all plastic, stopping all diesel cars right now without alternatives in place. And that is the challenge that we face. Will also said, I used to be an officer in the Royal Air Force, and I served on the no-fly zone in Iraq. And I learnt a lot about leadership. You get a lot more out of people if you're getting them to do something that's challenging, but they really want to do it. So to answer the question again, how do we encourage communities to achieve net zero? We make them want to do it. We make it easy. We make it affordable. And we explain why we're doing it. And it's so important to remember that. Two quick examples from my point of the neck of the woods, and then maybe we'll get to the panel. We had a coalition running Kirklees Council about 10 years ago. It was led by the Conservatives and Lib Dems and the Greens, and they had a warm homes scheme. It was easy for residents. Why? Because an assessor would knock on your door for free, do a quick assessment of your old terrace property, maybe in Marsden or Homebridge, where my mum and dad live, work out that you need some insulation pumping in, and they would arrange the grant. You'd also, by the way, get a carbon monoxide monitor if you needed one, and a smoke detector. So there was other incentives for having these people come into your home. It was easy, because someone else did it. It was affordable, because the council got the grants. And they wanted to do it because it made their home warmer, it reduced their energy bills, and it increased their value of the home. We've got to think about those things so that people want to do these things. And my second one as well is someone from my team drove me over in his Tesla today. I've got a more energy efficient car on order, but there's a big delay at the moment because of microchips apparently. And I was asking about what it's like driving a Tesla, where can he go, the benefits. Although the charging infrastructure is getting better, it's not ideal at the moment. Kirklees Council have done a good thing. If you have an electric car, it's free parking in all the council car parks. So again, it's easy, it's affordable, and we're coming on to the nudge theory, which I really like, but also some businesses as well. So the Huntsman Inn, just above Home Firth, you can go for a nice meal, and it's free charging there as well. So again, you're making it easy, you're making it affordable, you're nudging people in the right direction. But how do you do it on a big scale when we have the challenges of politics? And one final example, there was a by-election last year on the route of HS2. The winning candidate won because they opposed HS2, even though their party nationally was for it. I'm not criticising that because I totally understand they've had huge disruption, challenges to ancient woodlands and things like that. But that just shows the challenge of doing it on a big scale. To answer the question, needs to be easy, it needs to be affordable, people need to understand why they're doing it, and we need to take people with us. And I'm looking forward to the panel. Thank you.
Fantastic. Jason, thank you. I think you've just got to a number of the key salient points here, and there's lots of synergy between all of the remarks of the panellists so far, and I suspect David is going to reinforce some of those things. So David, could I bring you in?
Thank you. Well, Jason's already done half my talk for me, so that's thank you for that. Let me just make two kind of basic points to get going. I mean, why is it that the CCC, Climate Change Commission, say it's 60% of what we have to do is behavioural? Because when you unpack it, it's just a reality of it. When your boiler gives up, and it'll do it just before Christmas, statistically speaking, and 2/3 of boilers are distress purchased, what's going to happen? You're going to ask your plumber to come along, and you can start talking about heat pumps, and he's going to go, really? Do you really want to do that? Are you sure? You can have all the policy you like in Westminster. If your plumber says, are you sure? You're in trouble. And similarly, you talk about nudging. Who's the best nudgers aren't people like me, right, or Will, or like you. They're your neighbours. They're your friends. They're your kids. These are the people who really influence most of our behaviour. So with that in mind, I'm just going to build on with a couple of quick examples on the framework which actually Jason just laid out. We use a very slightly different one. We sometimes use is EAST. You want to think about easy, attractive, which includes affordable, but also social and timely, just to add these other elements, which are really important at the kind of micro level, which national governments are way too far away. So easy, yes. I mean, actually, one of the famous early examples that the Behavioural Insights team was involved in was the people who hadn't yet got around to insulating their homes. It was a no-brainer. Why didn't they do it? And one of the major blocks was because people had stuff in their attics, if you remember. So we did a scheme, which of course works best with local volunteers, which is to offer, would you like someone to help clear out that stuff in your attic and sort it in some way? It was 5 times more effective than offering them a financial incentive. So it's really important. Similarly, when you ask people about climate change, there has really been a sea change in people's willingness, not only in the UK, but in many countries, about they actually do want to do something about it. But when you get into the specifics of what exactly do I do, actually there's a lot of confusion. How important is it for me to say no to that straw in a kind of cool local bar versus actually have the veggie burger? Or actually say to my employer, what's our pension doing? Could it be invested in more green options? So those kinds of things are really important, let alone the kind of nuts and bolts of, can I recycle, or do I have 26 different boxes I've got to put it into? Can you make it easy? Exactly, as you just heard, absolutely key. The second bit, though, attractive, so that includes financial, but it's other aspects too. We want kids and parents to walk to school or walk to work. That is literally, is it attractive? The main reason why you don't want to do it is because there's a load of cars with other parents in. So what can you do to break through on that? Some cities and city-states across the world, for example, Tracy was talking about this around sophisticated sort of charging mechanisms for integrated transport. Like Singapore has also added into it gamification and fun elements that you can build on top. It'd be a wonderful irony if we could rework that whole world of air miles to actually save the planet rather than destroy it, eh? So there's just absolutely loads to be done in kind of making it attractive, breaking through. The social, just at pace though, we are incredibly influenced, as I said, by what other people do. So solar panels, we know, are literally contagious. Well, not quite literally contagious, but when your neighbour, puts solar panels on, you are much more likely to follow suit. So that's true, of course, in relation to lots of issues. A number of years ago, we were doing work on recycling across the UK, apart from the kind of technical barriers. One of the key variables is, do you trust your neighbours? Why would that be important? Well, why would I recycle if I don't think anybody else on the street is going to do so? It's really important, those kind of social influence. And also local government can do things like collective purchases. If you're all thinking about getting your Tesla, as others clearly are thinking about doing that, can you organise a collective purchase which sits alongside a local government commitment? Well, at that point, when 500 are bought, we'll, or signed up for, we'll introduce all these extra charging points. The last one, which I think sometimes gets missed, but again is so key, is timely. And it's all very well writing, legislation or having big incentives, but just like the plumbing example, what you find is a lot of our behavior is very habit-based, what we eat, how we go to work, etc. So a totally key detail is you'll make a change when that behavior is disrupted. So famous examples is, when the London Underground was shut for 2 days, very large numbers of people who are regular commuters shifted their patterns forever because it was disrupted. The same is true in lots of other areas. So if you want to do modal shifts of travel, we can work in US cities, where you find by far the best thing to do, you've got to contact people when they've just moved house. Why is that? It's because you haven't established your new habits. Or in relation to banks, I mean, one of the many reasons why banks are important is when you bought your new house, that is the key moment when you might get your property, heat pump ready, upgrade it. There are very few banks that are actually in that moment saying, oh, I see your EPC rating's not very good. We'd lend you an extra £5,000 at an incredibly low rate. And hey, we can even recommend a builder for you. Wouldn't that be good? A local builder. So you can sort of see a glimpse into, in a very practical way, alongside the kind of decarbonize our grid, we've just got to understand, the humanity of it and the kind of local, influences in order to make it an impact. And I'll just say one last thing, which the mayor picked up on, which I just really wanted to echo, not least with 10 mayors coordinating. My other hat is a kind of national advisor on what works, which is, it's not obvious what is the most effective way of doing some of this stuff. So to go back to our plumbers, it's a reasonable hypothesis that rather than spending loads of money on heat pump subsidies, a really good thing to do is just to subsidize plumbers to put in a heat pump in their own house or for their mum or something, so that they actually know it and experience it and are more persuasive. Is that more effective or not? I don't know, maybe, Tracy, you could get that organized. Could we do that trial? Is it more effective to just to get and pay plumbers to do that first heat pump, right? And then should every other city want to copy it? So we really need to get alongside this kind of robust sort of testing and evaluation of some of these alternatives so that we can laterally learn from each other. Thank you.
David, thank you so much. And I can confirm, I recently had my boiler reserviced, and my plumber was actively trying to discourage me from getting a heat pump because they cost too much. They were a pain to put in, and a combi boiler will still last you another 10 to 15 years, won't it? So it will be all right. So you're totally right about the messengers in all of this and the opportunity there. So I'm not going to hog up any more time because we've only got 10 minutes for Q&A. But can I now ask if anyone in the audience would like to kick us off with the first question? So we have a question here. I'll probably take more than one at a time. So if anyone else has a question, do let me know. But if you, gentlemen, could stand up and...
Hi, Andrew White from Barclay Group, one of the build brownfield regeneration on gasworks and things like this. Centre of towns, right near amenity, inherently sustainable. Is there a role for mortgage products that focus on these inherently sustainable ways of living, which go beyond just the fabric of the building? Because obviously you can have an EPC rating on a new build house out past the wing road where you all have to drive 3 times a day. Not a very sustainable way of living, but you've got your green mortgage, as opposed to right in the middle of town where you've got one parking space for every 5 flats.
Okay, Tom, prior warning, I'm going to come to you on that question specifically, if that's right. I think there was another question just behind. Is that right? Yeah, could you please stand up and... Yeah.
I notice a theme here of what we're talking about is that you can afford to mobility. I've worked
Okay.
with people's houses. The outlay is absolutely ridiculous. Working on hybrid combi boilers will be ideal, and I know affordability. We're talking about when we can afford things in the day. That London itself. We're talking about weight. We're talking about after. What can we afford now? People can't afford to eat. This are going to sustain. Global network isn't sustainable.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, so thank you. That was a great question. So I'm going to come to Tom first on whether or not we should be designing mortgage products according to where they are as well as what they're for. And then I'm going to come to Jason and Tracy, if I may, on how do you tackle that particular problem of affordability? How do you get people who don't have very much money to make choices that might cost money to save the planet and to deliver some of the benefits that we're talking about. So, Tom, could I come to you first?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's one we talk to government about a lot. We need a system that rates the sustainability of properties, which really reflects their sustainability. And the EPC system is the one we've got at the moment, but we need it to evolve in ways that are more comprehensive. So the EPC system is imperfect, for example, at reflecting energy sources at the moment. It's more of a judgment on the quality of the house. So it's another example of where it's an imperfect measure of the sustainability of a house. So we spend a lot of time talking to BAYs and other mortgage lenders about saying, you know, we need a system that measures the sustainability of a property that we can all use that reflects its true sustainability.
Okay, so very strong agreement there. So could I come to Tracy first and then
Sure,
Jason?
sure. And honestly, I can't agree more because part of this problem is that it is a middle-class solution, that those with a good income are able to do the right thing. When 60% of the second-hand car market comes from fleet vehicles, those with more, those big businesses can help us by making them more affordable. And I know people with a Tesla. I couldn't afford a Tesla, and I'm on a lovely job with a nice wage because they're eye-wateringly expensive. And it's almost a mark of how much you earn, the fact that you have a Tesla, in my opinion. So it's become the new sort of luxury car. I think that what we are doing, certainly, for example, on my manifesto commitment, 5,000 affordable, sustainable homes, it can't be either or. So sustainability is really important. And there are beautiful homes being built that are sustainable, but are £500,000. They are not affordable for the communities that need them the most. So we can intervene, for example, in social housing. Now, there are 700,000 properties in West Yorkshire that we could embark on retrofitting those homes. And talking to Chloe, a mum in Holbeck, whose house had that sort of wrap around. It's an amazing stuff. It looks like brick. You wouldn't know it's been done. It's wrapped up. And she was saying exactly what I said in my speech, that family life is different because her home is warmer, but also her costs are lower. And that's where we have that conversation with communities and say, that school, with its solar panels, the money that it makes on extra energy can then fund after-school clubs or breakfast clubs. So we have to understand that this is from a community level up. And you're right, people want to do the right thing, but it doesn't feel like a priority. But as leaders, we can make it to as easy as possible and something that's a choice for your family and your community, and absolutely about communities telling each other this is great and this should be done. And you know, there are loads of options out there. It doesn't have to be the heat pump that's really expensive. I know there's loads of investigation into hydrogen and other options, but we must work as a community. There can be no divide between those who can do the right thing because they can afford it and those that are paying over the odds for heating and are really suffering. So I take your point.
Jason.
No, thank you, Tracy. Really good question and something that we in Parliament think about all the time. I would just echo, you know, we've just done a previous session and we were talking about flying and things like that. There's lots of people that can't afford to fly or go on a holiday or go on long-haul business trips and things like that. And that's why I was talking about this, you know, warm home scheme that was in Kirklees. A lot of the housing in Kirklees is very old, a lot of terrace. I actually live in a small end of terrace 3-bedroom property in the centre of my village. I love it. My neighbour is a carer and has a second job as well. She has such a busy life, she probably hasn't had time to think about how to make her home more in keeping with net zero. So that's why I was thinking about how we make it easy and affordable for her. I was just looking at some figures. They're taking about £6,000 to £10,000 for heat pumps. Where on earth are people meant to get that money from as well? If you look at some recent parliamentary questions I've been asking Kwasi Kwarteng, the BAYS secretary, I think the government need to go back to the Green Home Scheme with these vouchers, with these grants, and as I say, make it easy for people to have the assessors going to people's homes, working with the local councils, and show them the benefit is, the nudge theory from Dr. David, their energy bills will be going down. Yes, we need extra help now, and I welcome what the Chancellor did yesterday, and we need to do a lot more, but make it easy for people. You, by having this done to your home, will make it warmer, but it will also save money on your bills. Thank you for raising that. The question was, and I kept repeating it, how do we encourage communities? And it's all of us that need to play our part in achieving net zero and being sustainable. And thank you for asking the question.
Could I just make an additional point that builders and developers are building new homes and the expectation is an EV charging point, but there are families that will never have a car, will never be able to afford to pass a test. And in Kirklees, what they've been doing is insisting developers in the first year give those people who buy that home a bus pass. I think that's quite innovative, actually. So they have an EV charging point, yeah, sure, but also a bus pass so that people can walk to the bus stop and it's greener and more affordable.
Thank you very much. I'm going to take one question for David and Shanika, if we have any. If not, okay, I have one question at the back. Thank you very much. That's a great question for both David and Shanika because they'll cover it from different angles. So David, could I bring in you first? What does the evidence tell us about where these type of collective schemes that you mentioned should be operated from?
Sorry, well, I'm afraid I couldn't hear the question at all well. Did you say what collective schemes can work best, did you say?
So at what level, i.e. community, local authority, combined authority, central government, should collective purchasing schemes of the type you described, where should they be sitting?
So my view is, I mean, national is way too high. I mean, fine, you could have some framework elements to cross-subsidise them, but in the end, they're much more likely to operate at local level, right? And that's partly because also that's where the efficiency gains are likely to come from, right? So if you think about heating systems or storage systems, you've got this issue like someone might have solar panels, but you know, they're most efficient if you use the power during the day, and it's someone opposite, right? So similarly on cars, you're not going to do it at a national level, but it is plausible to think, be it, you know, secondhand electric vehicles or whatever it is you're going to purchase, or I love Tracy's idea, by the way, of the give the bus pass. You know, these things are generally likely to operate where there's an actual kind of sense of community and connection, and that's where the gain lies. And of course, you literally have forms of collective heating systems which might be viable, or geothermal, or so that tends to be my view. You know, you solve it at that level.
Thank you very much, David. And Shanika, what about the funding or the subsidies for these types of schemes? I'd love to hear what the British Bank thinks about.
Yeah, I'm going to take it slightly differently, actually, because I think the voice of the small businesses as a collective community gets lost quite a lot in the discussion around net zero, and they're so important to the local economies and for jobs creation, and actually to empower greater affordability on this topic. And so the reason I'm talking about it is because smaller businesses are such a key part of supply chains of bigger businesses and will be in the procurement processes on all of these. And I think it's really important that smaller businesses embrace the transition, because these questions are going to be asked as part of the procurement processes, whether it's local government or big business or national government. And so seizing the opportunity, taking advantage of taking the early steps to be able to think about what your carbon footprint is, think about the impact that you're having more broadly on sustainability and be able to be on the front foot of that will create such opportunities in smaller businesses, in the local economy. It's a shame to miss out on that opportunity. And then taking your question around where the subsidies should lie, I think it does have to, probably repeating what David says, in that it does depend on where it embeds most into the community and where the greatest impact can be had by taking that decision. Where sometimes it will be national, sometimes it will be more granular local, and sometimes it will be combined. I don't think there's one right answer only to that. It has to be specific to what's being bought and what the outcome is.
Fantastic. So we are out of time. I let it run on slightly longer just because we started a bit later than planned. Thank you so much to our speakers. Thank you. It has been an extraordinarily rich discussion with a huge number of thoughts being rattling around in my mind. We are actually doing some work precisely on this, on net zero neighbourhoods, actually with David and some of his team to try and understand how some of those behavioural incentives at a neighbourhood level can be used to support behavioural change and drive collective decision making exactly the way as the panel described. So that was entirely unprompted, which is excellent. So I will share that when we have it coming out. But we now move on to our final panel of the day, which is on restitching the social fabric outside of major cities. I'm going to ask you all to stay sitting where you